Welcome to Rock That Relationship, a podcast about all things relationship with Corey and Tracy.
Now let's get real and start creating relationships that rock.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Rock That Relationship. We are here in our season talking all about, well, relationships, particularly relationships that are maybe longer term relationships and all of the great successful and effective and productive things you can do to really show up and be present and get the most out of your relationship with you and your partner. So we're really thrilled today to have Satira Streeter Corbitt here today, who is a clinical psychologist and certified relationship therapist. So welcome to the show. We're so glad to have you on. Well, why don't we start with, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your background and what drew you to the work you do. I mean, you're a certified relationship therapist. What do you do all day? What does that mean? And what do you like about it?
All right. No, thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited to talk to you all today. So I have been a clinical psychologist for the past 23 years. And during the pandemic, I think I, just like everybody else, started questioning life. Started questioning, like, what is it that I do that's bringing me joy? What is it that I want to do more of? Where can I be most impactful? And that's when I really dug deep with the couples therapy. So, throughout these 23 years, I've done a lot. I've been a therapist in a prison, in a federal prison. I've been a therapist that worked in a special education school. And I eventually started my own nonprofit back in 2004, focusing on families and definitely those people who had been disadvantaged by, different systems that had kept them possibly in poverty or under-resourced. But I kept, one thing that kept being clear, even when I was doing work with children, is that if I could help their parents be better models and create the love that they needed and wanted, then they would be able to benefit from that and benefit from that greatly. So that really is my passion, really working with couples for the benefit of children. And, and even when there's not children present that they are actually parenting, what I find is typically there's always some young person somewhere that's looking at you and looking at your model, looking at what, how you're interacting and learning from you. So even those couples, it still is beneficial to the community to make sure that they have healthy relationships.
That's so awesome. I always say that, like, everybody needs a therapist, right? Every family, everybody, every person, because everything that's happened to us comes from when we're growing up, right? And so we learn that. And I think generationally, it's getting better as far as people accessing therapy, but it's also not, it's hard for everyone to get it or realize like they really truly need it, right? To have a well-functioning family, let alone you being out in the world as a human being.
And I would, the one thing that I have come to find though, is that it's actually sad that everybody needs a therapist, because if community worked the way the community should work and villages worked the way that they're supposed to work and systemic biases and all of those things weren't a thing, I feel like we would be able to help each other and support each other. And you would go to your next door neighbor when you needed to talk and, really get that support. So I wish that wasn't the case, but the way the world is set up right now, you're right. It does feel like everybody needs a therapist. I want to make it so that's not the case. So one of my things that I'm really big on is empowering folks. And I always let people know, whatever I'm sharing with you, please share it with somebody else. Please, either by what you're modeling or by giving them the resources directly so that we can create, again, the community and the village that's needed so that we don't have to rely on people outside of us to really get the help. And don't get me wrong, there's definitely mental illnesses and things of that nature that is, beyond, depression and anxiety and things that we should, if we were able to talk and be in community, we could do better with. But yeah, for the vast majority, if we can get the village right, then we could get our mental health right.
I was making this point to a friend yesterday who wants to travel. She's older than me, in her late 50s, and she was saying how she felt so isolated after the pandemic, and then now she's afraid to go out and be alone in the world. And I'm like, both Corey and I travel a lot. I never feel alone when I travel, because people, it's like they finally can come together. They're a little bit quiet in their life, and you actually end up making more friends and sitting around and talking to people in a way that you don't. I don't know if it's just American society or what's happening, but it seems that, people, you don't just stop by your neighbor's house. You don't just ask people for help anymore. And it's like the American way is to become more and more isolated.
Right. And it's a sad state of affairs. It's funny. I was just reading a book yesterday, and it was a fiction book, but it was very real in terms of the experience of a woman who had this huge desire to just take this long train ride from California all the way through Canada and kind of end up in New York. And how much she was looking forward to doing something like that, how she anticipated. And again, she was adamant, like her friends were like, hey, we want to go with you. Her mom was like, take me with you. And she's like, nope, I'm going by myself. And then when she gets on this train ride, she is doing kind of that dream of just talking to people and having these random conversations with somebody that's getting off in Oregon, somebody that's getting off in Seattle. And that, I think that speaks to the point that you just said, just having that ability, to just be free and shed some of the stuff that kind of holds you and the expectations. Sometimes we don't do things because we're embarrassed. We think we'll be rejected. But if we're out here interacting with people that may not see us again, sometimes it's easier to be a little freer.
Yes, exactly.
Well, thinking about, this is really helpful. And you're thinking about, like, when we pull it back into our own relationships, right? Like our own inner circles. And, you work with, you said couples and families and things. Our listeners are really looking for kind of guidance and advice, or even sometimes validation that what they're experiencing is real, even though it is real. Sometimes just knowing that someone else can name it or talk about it makes it feel like it's part of, kind of their existence. And so when you're working with folks, what are some of the kinds of more common conflicts that you see that come up between people in relationships? And you're thinking about it in the context of the fact that they might be holding this in because that village isn't there. There aren't other people to talk to, and they're holding it in, and they have this type of conflict. What kinds of things do you see more often than others in your work?
Because I work, mostly with African American couples, the one theme, unfortunately, that I see, time and time again is couples telling me they just didn't have the model, because all the things I mentioned before in terms of, kind of issues and not getting the supports as families and them coming up in an era, a lot of my clients grew up, unfortunately, through the crack era, through the crack epidemic and not having those models. So then you get into a relationship and you literally are building the boat and trying to sell it at the same time. And your reference for a healthy relationship is the Cosby Show. So basically not having that realistic day-to-day in your house. How do you solve issues? How do you work it out? How do you manage conflict? How do you do those things that are absolutely necessary for you to be in a relationship and a functioning one? And what I've been in therapy all day today. And one theme that I kept hearing over and over again is both partners just really saying they want to be seen. They want to be heard. They want to be validated, by their partner. And it's just not happening. And when they can't get that from that place, when you can't get that from your person, right, then where can you get it from? Who is going to care enough to hear about even the small things and care about those things and take on your things and help you shoulder the weight of the world? Sometimes when you feel like your partner doesn't get you, it's like, well, nobody's going to get me then if this person can't get me.
And just so our listeners know, you appear to be African American. I assume you are.
I am.
And does that, being African American, do the outside pressures just of the kind of things that are happening to the Black community in this country, and then also probably would happen for gay people, different pressures, but do those pressures, like outside pressures, affect the relationship and cause conflict as well?
Absolutely. And one of my one of my best friends is a psychologist that actually graduated from Wright State, and her work centers on intersectionality. So, just dealing with, what's it like to be a lesbian couple and African American, and having, both of those things compound in terms of, those are two groups that, if we are honest about it, that society has not necessarily supported being together. When we talk about gay relationships, when we talk about Black relationships, I wrote a chapter in a book here recently called Blacks and Couples Therapy. It's a textbook. And the way I started off the chapter is really that, Black love is a miracle, because, when we were brought here from Africa, we weren't brought here to have healthy relationships and to ride off into the sunset. We were brought here to breed and produce. So, if there's never a part of life, like when we think about the last 400 years, at what part did, society say, hey, let's support Black marriage? If we think about Jim Crow and, men being emasculated in front of their wives. If we think about the prison system and, men, of course, being carted out of their homes. If we think about, even the welfare system, when we think about like the 70s and all that, where, a woman could lose her benefits if it was found out that she had a man, living in the home, then, she would have to choose between her children's father and if she could feed her children at the same time. So it's really, and again, my couples, my LGBTQ plus couples kind of say the same thing, that there are no necessary supports in American society to make sure that they are able to thrive and to get what they need and deal with their issues. And I've had a lot of, I would say at this point, maybe 35% of my couples are same gender loving, or they have these relationships where when sometimes they talk to the pastor, or they even talk to the therapist, it's like, why that's not working? Why your relationship's not working? Because you guys probably aren't supposed to be together in the first place.
Yeah.
Can you imagine?
Right.
It's actually
so
horrific.
They're already getting like problems from society at large because they're African American. Then you add on problems within the African American community because they're LGBT. So they're doubly not getting support. And I imagine when you have that, like, I mean, I know this for a fact because I'm gay, but like the external pressure, then you come home, right? And you're more tense, or you're less able to access like love for somebody. If you're upset, you're self-loathing or self-shaming, or you feel beaten up by the world.
Right. It's almost like it's not almost like you needed a little bit more, just like when we think about, children. I'm raising 2 children, and I have one child that's a little bit more sensitive and needs a little bit more cuddling and, extra hand holding and extra motivation. If you've been beat up by, the society and the world and your job and all of that, and to come home and not be able to get the love you need and get that support, it hits extra hard. And that's what I find in therapy, which makes it so heart-wrenching, but then it also makes me even more committed to do this work, because we all deserve love. We all deserve to be able to communicate. We all deserve to be able to be seen and heard.
I love what you're saying about this, because you think about it too, like you have 2 partners that are coming home that both got beat up that day, that have to somehow summon some kind of strength to be there for each other and for themselves, and that to me is it's always so interesting, because I also identify as gay, and it's like, wow, like if I experience some kind of homophobic thing, my partner was usually standing right next to me, and like we're supposed to somehow be there for each other, and that validation and being seen, like you were talking about. I would imagine that that's probably also something that, that some of your people that you talk with in therapy might experience too, is like, sometimes I don't have the strength to be there for you. I don't know if that's something you see.
Right. And that is, and that's the art, like, I'm certified as a Gottman therapist, a Gottman's couple therapist, and literally one of their most popular systems, there's a retreat, a weekend retreat, and it's literally called the Art and Science of Love, because it is there's an art to relationships, and there's some science behind relationships and what makes relationships work. And without knowing both, like, how do you finesse it? How do you balance? How do you make sure that you take a little for yourself so that you can have a little bit more to give? If you can't figure out that, and you can't figure out the ratios and all of that, then, your relationship can end up being even more detrimental than the things that are going on, outside of the house.
Right. Like the put on your face mask before you put on someone else's. Sometimes, being able to do that.
Absolutely.
That's great.
Absolutely.
We'll make sure to share that with our listeners in the show notes too about that retreat. And
yeah, that's something that we offer here in DC. It's something that I travel to come to people to do. I'll be hopefully doing one in Ohio really soon, in Columbus, my hometown. But yeah, being able to have to learn, like, there's just some things that you have to learn about relationships that they don't teach you at school.
And so I want to talk about this for like the next 12 hours, but I know we're limited to what we can talk about. But I think this is so great. And it's my understanding, having worked in a Black community as a police officer in the 90s, and then being, around a lot of people from that community since then, that therapy isn't something in the Black community that's really, I don't want to say valued or accessible, but there's a fear of it or something. Is it, if you're having these retreats, do they have them specifically for gay people? Do they have them for Black people? Do you think people do better when they're with people that are similar to them than they're the barriers to, or they're not trying to hold up a facade for other people? Am I making any sense?
No, you're making a whole lot of sense. And sometimes it again, it's about community. It's about being in spaces that feel safe, and they feel safe because that the individuals, even though they may not have had your exact same issue, that they can relate, and there's something that's going on that they have struggled with too. And again, in couples, as individuals, nobody wants to feel isolated. So being able to be in those spaces and possibly let your hair down a little bit, and not have to worry about the judgments or the assumptions and all of those things. Sometimes those do become really, really safe spaces.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember I went to a couples therapist once with my ex-partner, and I could tell right away that she was sort of going through the motions because we were a same-sex couple, and I could feel it. And it was just, it just made me clam up. And not only did it make me say, like, I don't want to be with this therapist, it's almost like I don't want to be with a therapist at all because I don't feel validated or heard. And so I can see how that can happen kind of with anybody who might have had some kind of a experience with a therapist like that. But then on the flip side, having a really good embracing experience can probably break down those barriers, I would imagine, and create a pretty trusting relationship. I don't know. Right. How do you kind of balance that?
Right. No, it definitely, again, being in Tracy, what you were talking about a moment ago is the stigma. There is a stigma connected to therapy. And there's a stigma in the gay community, again, being judged, being misgendered, not getting the support you need, all of those things. Same thing about the African American community, because things have been, there have been times that African American families, couples, parents have gone out for help, and that help got flipped around, and they ended up in a situation that was detrimental. And, even thinking about, and I don't even know if you all feel like having the conversation that religion can play a role in, and if you have a strong religious base, and if those folks are telling you, oh, you don't need to go to therapy, you just need to seek the Lord, then that's another thing. And then also there's a protection. It's so interesting that I have a client that I have seen probably for 8 years. And it literally, we've talked about everything. We've talked about weight. We've talked about dating. We've talked about all kinds of stuff. And the one thing that she would not talk about until recently was her mother. She wouldn't talk about her mother because there is a protection in the Black community, and I'm sure other communities too, that you just don't say anything bad about your parents. Her mother was giving her holy heck every single day. And because she didn't want her therapist, who didn't know her mother. Her mother was in a whole other state or any of that. She didn't want me to think bad about her mother.
Right.
So she wouldn't say anything about it. So there's the protection of your family, and, you know, you're taught, especially as an African-American child, what happens in this house stays in this house.
Mm-hmm.
So the thought of going and telling a therapist who is a stranger, you know, family business is a huge betrayal.
Mm-hmm.
So again,
Mm-hmm.
those are other things that go on with the stigma. And then, so you, by the time person, especially a person of color, gets to the point that they are entering into therapy, all of the stuff that they've had to, you know, the mind things, the financial things, often the location, having to get through all that to get to a therapist's office and find that that therapist is not welcoming or affirming. I mean, can you imagine?
Or you have
and
to
it takes-
explain some cultural things that they're like very basic that they're not even getting. And then you're like, oh my gosh.
Right. I just went through all of that. I had to jump through 10 hoops to get here, and I've gotten here, and you can't help me because you don't understand my journey. You don't understand who I am. And in some cases, it feels like you're not even trying to understand.
This is why the pandemic, one of the good things the pandemic brought about was more Zoom, right? So I know you have to be licensed as a clinical psychologist in this particular state, but your license can be used in other states, right? So I have a friend who's a Black male therapist, and he does a lot of Zoom clients. And I think it's very rare to find an African-American therapist, right? And so if you can, you no longer have to go to the therapist's office. You no longer have to, you know, take time off of work and drive. You can do it on your lunch hour or whatever, do it from your office or car. And I think that's so valuable because there aren't a ton of gay therapists. There aren't a ton of Black therapists, and it's harder to find. And I do know, like, I've been going to therapy on and off since like the 80s. And so I grew up in that kind of household of don't say anything, you know? And so my sisters, like, I always talk about this on the podcast. I didn't read that book, Toxic Parents, until I was 47. And yeah, that changed my life. And, I've already, you know, I was 47 years old, lots of relationships, married, all of that. But it was that book that, like, again, it's not that I want to slam my parents. It's that it shows you how these family structures, if you don't have them growing up, it's really detrimental to you, you know, as an adult. And you see that. I mean, I was a police officer and a criminal defense attorney, and that's what you see, right? You see that that's where all the problems, it's not because the parents are bad people. It's because they also didn't get that structure or scaffolding or learning, right?
Right.
So the service you're doing is so invaluable, and I can't wait for your whole book, not just a chapter, but a whole book about it. I mean, you could have a show. That's the thing. I think you're dealing with underrepresented people, right? And it's just so hard to be in this world and really not see yourself or get the help you need, you know?
Yeah. No, it is. And that, to me, that's the bare minimum. When people need somebody to talk to, they should have somebody to talk to. And that was the whole reason that we created Ascensions, my organization, as a nonprofit, because I didn't want money to be a barrier of being able to get the services you need. You know, unfortunately, I have my mother, my biological mother it was called manic depressant back then, but she has bipolar disorder. So me understanding mental illness early on, me going to foster care early on, me being sent to a therapist who was just kind of like what you spoke about a moment ago, hadn't a clue of how to talk to this little Black girl who didn't know who her father was, whose mother was running through the streets naked, and decided to use some crack on top of that. This woman just she didn't know what to do. She had no idea what to do. And it was in her office when I need to go find her and thank her, because it was in her office when I was 10 years old that I said, you know what? Do this when I grow up, and I'm going to do this way better because I get it. Wow. So, you know, is interesting. Like I said, I have two sons, and, you know, one day he wants to be a writer. He wants to be, the next day he wants to be a video game designer. And, you know, he goes through all of these different iterations of what he's going to be when he grows up. But for me, again, I wanted to be one thing. I knew at that point it had, so And I'm like, maybe I've made his life too easy that he has all these different choices and not a specific calling, but that's a whole different conversation. But yeah, but sometimes through trial, that builds, kind of focus, and that builds a vision. And I think that's what happened for me, just having the unfortunate experience. And again, I often think like my mother is now 80 years old and still run around Columbus with all of her mental illness and all of the things that she has. And I'm just like, I wonder if somebody would have been able to intervene at the right point, in the right way, would her life have turned out differently? Because it wasn't that she wasn't smart. She actually went to school and became a registered nurse. It wasn't that she wasn't beautiful. She was a model at one point. But, mental illness will snuff out all of your good intentions if you're not able to get what you need.
And same for relationships, right? If you like, how many relationships could actually succeed, if we say succeed or fail, if only like, just looking back at my relationships, how I screwed those up, right? Because of a lack of resources and understanding, or just even access to that. So,
or modeling, like we were saying, right? Looking at, like my parents are divorced, and looking at them, are they a model they're not a model for effectively getting along, I can tell you that, but were they a model for me to say, that's not what I want? Yeah.
But even if you can say that's not what you want, I think it's so hard, especially when you're in the confines of a relationship, to put that into practice, right? So I assume a lot of this, well, I don't assume, I'm trying to do this myself, but a lot of relationship stuff is practice, right? Like, you don't have to be perfect at it. You don't have to know exactly what you're doing, but you should be constantly trying in a relationship, I think, to be better. Like, one of my things I put in my manifest for who I want to date was someone with a growth mindset. And that's something I didn't even understand 5 years ago. That wasn't like, if you'd said that to me, I'd be like, I don't know what you're talking about. Right. And like making that stuff it's not shame. I think so many people have so much shame about, we can't make a relationship work, or, well, how could you? I mean, what tools did you have?
What tools did you have? What did you have in your toolkit? And oftentimes it's you're walking around and these folks have empty toolkits. And again, we talk, especially again, me being in the nonprofit world and me being right here in the heart of Washington, D.C., what do we hear about all the time? Single parenthood. And yes, that's a very real thing. But what if we helped people have healthier relationships, and we help them to know themselves so they can know how to pick a person and all of those things? Then maybe that wouldn't be as big of an issue, as it is. So it literally, this relationship, if we're able to get those relationships right, again, we're able to work through some other things. I fuss at my children all the time just because they're boys and they're hard-headed and all the things, but I really like who they are as people, and I like how they treat other people. And I know there's some things I can't take credit for, like they just came here good, right? Kind of. But there are some things that I can take credit for, which is being very intentional about how their father and I interact. What they see in the home, some of the rules and the things that we set up, how, I show love to them and make sure that they know this is how you treat people. You don't look down on people. You treat everybody with respect, regardless of what they're going through. And if you're able to, again, model that with your partner, your child learns that. And my kids are going to be less likely to go out here and carjack someone or get on drugs. And again, anything can happen. And I'm not blaming parents for kids going astray, but at some point, sometimes we do have to take responsibility. If I'm cussing out my husband every day and then my kid goes to school and cusses out, his peers or gets in fights, I'm going to have to look at myself and say, gosh, I probably did not model how to deal with even frustration tolerance. So it literally is all linked, and we have to just really be mindful of that as grownups.
Yeah, you're doing the opposite of intergenerational trauma. You're healing that trauma, right? Heal people, and that's what you're doing, is showing, like, breaking those trauma bonds,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
But it's going to take a couple generations, I think, and people like
Right.
you speaking out and doing seminars and writing these books and like taking the stigma away. And it's like all our lives will be better. That's what I would talk to my clients about, criminal defense clients is not, I'm a lawyer, but that doesn't mean my life is perfect, right? And I've had all these struggles. It's just that either I had some more tools or I had, got lucky at this point or whatever. I made different choices, but it's all because of what goes into you as you grow up and what you see and,
And I say that all the time, that childhood lasts forever. Childhood absolutely lasts forever because again, the stuff that we talk about, it really has a direct impact on, again, what you saw, what you felt. Like when I'm doing an intake with a couple, I ask them, like, tell me about the climate of your home. What did it feel like to come home after school? Were there family movie nights? Did you have the type of home where you can go and climb in mom and dad's bed and watch TV and eat popcorn and do those things? Like, what did that feel like? What did you guys talk about at the dinner table? Or were you not talking? How did you all figure out things when things got hard? And again, those things are learned. And even to the point of what one of you said is that even if it's not modeled, we get around 15, 16, 17 and we say, okay, I never want this type of relationship. So that's, again, another impact. And we set out to have something very different than what we saw. So either, and sometimes, and I've seen in couples that even those couples that made that pledge, that said, okay, I'm not going to have a household where we're fussing and fighting and cussing all the time. That's not what I want. But even in those couples, even if they had those good intentions, sometimes they are able to slip back into what they saw, even with the best intentions. So it really takes them being even more focused on the goal in order to be able to break out of those cycles like you just talked about.
Because like when we're under stress, we regress, right? So we go back. So then you have two kids fighting with each other who are adults in a household if they don't know how to manage conflict or stress. And as one of my former couples therapists said, when it's hysterical, it's historical. So if you're having these outsized reaction, right? When that always, I'm like, okay, why is this person or why am I acting, right? Why am I acting so crazy? Right. And then I hear that in my mind, like when it's hysterical, it's historical.
It's historical.
And I always, yeah, it's great. And I always viewed a partner as an enemy, even though I wanted to get in relationships. As soon as I got in one, I'm like, that person's an enemy. And I would recreate that because that's what I grew up with, right? So you recreate in your home what you saw growing up, unless you're really that good and astute and you're like, oh, I don't want to do that in my life. But most people can't do that. Most people are like doing what they saw.
Right.
Right.
We're products of our environment. Oftentimes, we are products of our environment. And again, it's hard to fight. I'm one that did have to fight. So it's not impossible. But my life would look very different and it's not just that I was so great that I set up some great intentions and was able to figure it out. When I think about the whole sum, how did Satira end up with a doctorate, by the time she was 25? How did Satira graduate from Wilberforce summa cum laude? How did I do these things? And yes, some of it was intention, but some of it was there were sprinkle of people that came along the way that showed something different. So at each stage of my life, there's been typically a group of people that were able to walk me through that particular season in order for me to be okay. Everybody doesn't get that though. Everyone doesn't get to interface with that professor, with that teacher that sees that you're struggling and they pick you up, from school, or they pick you up on the weekends. Like everyone doesn't get that. And is it their fault? Is it my fault if I'm a kid that doesn't have the personality that pulls people to me? No. But does that make life harder and even more obstacles to come? Unfortunately, it does.
Yeah. Well, I'm kind of thinking about it. So these kids are all grown up, and we have, you have potentially couples coming in to meet with you, what do you do in situations where there's maybe that one that has a growth mindset that says, I don't have the tools. Where do I start? I'm ready to go. And then the other one who feels that they've been dragged into the session and ends up being, I know that because I've dated those people. And so how do you do that where they both can sort of just see this and move forward?
Right. Right. And again, I think that's the art and science of therapy, being able to, sometimes it's a dance. The most important thing that I can do as a psychologist, as a therapist, is build a relationship. So how do I build a relationship with both members of the couple, both partners, so that they are able to maybe release some of that defensiveness so that they can hear what their partner is trying to say? How can they play those things out in front of me, so I can have a sense of what happens at home, so that I can see really what the cycle is, what the pattern is, and get them to focus on that. Sue Johnson's work, emotionally focused therapy, is something that I've been diving into deeply. And what she talks about is really the cycle that happens, which is, you get a trigger, you feel this type of way, you make some meaning about it. You tell yourself, oh, this means that I'm worthless. This means that I'm not worthy. I'm useless. And then you have an action. You go into some type of protection in order not to feel that way, or to basically have some relief. And if we get couples to see and stop fighting each other, but more so identify and see the cycle that they get into, and really start to fight that and attack that together, and understanding that cycle started way before the two of them got together. Most likely that cycle is from childhood. That cycle has to deal with attachment issues. That cycle has all those things. But if you could get them to focus on the cycle versus seeing each other as the enemy, that can make all the difference. And every single couple has some type of cycle that they go through, and it mimics itself over and over again. And you can drop different content in, but it ends up still being the same steps that they take, that gets them to those destructive places.
And we talk about this a lot on the podcast, like either personality assessments, attachment style assessments, things like that. Do you see each partner alone ever, or you like a couple sessions alone, or do you start out together? Like, how does that go? And do you feel like there's a model that works best?
Yeah. So what typically works, regardless, like again, the two most popular, well-researched therapies for couples would be the Gottman method, and then that emotionally focused therapy by Sue Johnson. And both of those say that you start with an assessment of the couple together, and you're able to get some information, see how they interact. And then it is important kind of for the next step to see them separately and get, some more information about family of origin, get some more information about attachment styles, their view on the relationship, their motivation, their agenda, even for therapy, and then coming back together to kind of come up with an assessment, to figure out what do you do from there. So that definitely is what is prescribed for good therapy.
Yeah. Well, what do you do, like for our listeners, if they wanted to start somewhere, they're like, you know what, I just need to start, and maybe they can't get to therapy right away, or maybe they have the stigma, whatever it is. What's that kind of first step for them? Maybe some things you'd recommend?
Right. I really am extremely impressed by the resources that the Gottman method really offers. And a lot, Gottman is definitely a therapeutic method, but it also has some psychoeducation in there too, where they're teaching you some things. They're teaching you the 7 principles of a healthy relationship and good communication and things like that. So being able to go on the Gottman's website and look at the many, many resources that they have, the many videos that are out there that talks about the 4 horsemen, that talk about the sound relationship house, that talk about how to be a good listener, like all of those things. So I think those are our first steps in terms of kind of being able to go together on a journey to get that information, because again, I went to school 8 years to get a doctorate, and my degree is absolutely important, but what's more important is my family relationship. And there's absolutely not a course that is offered or mandated in order to have a successful family. So really doing your due diligence and studying this, and not just trying to wing it, because there's a lot of people out here trying to wing a relationship and wing putting together a family. And you don't have to anymore. You don't have to just make it up as you go along. There are resources, and there's research that's been done that says these are the things that are necessary for a healthy relationship.
Yeah. So Corey and I have talked a lot about that. We did that. We both were having breakups like recently, right before we met each other. And we were like trading, oh, listen to this podcast, listen to this audio book. And we each got like a cheap audiobook subscription, Scribd, and then we'd look online, and most podcasts are free, right? And so you can hear all that. So you can get onto Gottman's website and watch all that stuff for free, you're saying, and stuff?
Yeah, there's definitely there's free resources. There's, of course, paid resources as well that may go a little bit deeper. But I think the first step is to get absolutely everything you can get for free. And then taking that next step to see if you want to take a deeper dive to start, doing some things. But we know in terms of your local library, my new relaxation thing is, our audiobooks and being able, like I just was able to get Sue Johnson's book, Hold Me Tight, on audiobook from my library for free. So being able to just take advantage of the resources that are there, can make a really big difference.
Yeah. And I have one more thing about therapy. You go to a therapist either alone or in a couple, and then you don't have another appointment for a week or two. So do you think it's important? I always tell people, like, the therapist is giving you like the scaffolding, but you have to do the work. Like, the therapist isn't doing the work for you, right? You're like a guide. Do you see yourself more as a guide? And then, okay, you can't just walk out of here and then come back a week later and have done nothing or thought nothing about it.
Right. Yeah. I say that all the time, that, the way that I start therapy is telling couples that although I've been, a psychologist for over 2 decades, at the end of the day, I'm not the expert in the room. You are. I feel like the creator, or whoever you believe that to be, has given us everything we need to work through our stuff. And sometimes we just get stuck. And it's literally my job to help you get unstuck. But yes, the onus is on you. The knowledge is within you, and the work is within you. So you're going to have to do that work in between. And the other thing I tell people all the time is, I don't want to be your therapist forever. Gone are the days of psychoanalysts, where you just come to therapy for years and years and years. My goal is to get in, give you what you need, and get out, so that you can, again, go forth and spread it and continue to apply it to your life. So that makes it doubly important for you to do the work in between sessions in order to get the progress that you need and deserve.
And being able to be that person that you're saying that spreads it, right? I mean, if one person in a community, I know in the LGBTQ community, has a good experience, for instance, with a therapist, we have good things to say about it. And that's a lot of times why we talk about seeking out resources and therapy on this on this podcast, because we do have a lot of lesbian listeners who may have had maybe not so good experiences when seeking out therapy. Is not guaranteeing that they're going to for sure, but basically saying that put the system can be trusted to some extent. Like, we're trying to promote it, so people can go get the support that they need. But, similar to what you were talking about, the stigma or the fear of going and seeing a therapist is a very, very big thing in the LGBTQ community as well. And so, that's why we love talking to folks like you who come on and share real life situations, tools, practical advice, things that sort of, I guess, just demystify, right, the therapy process. Sometimes this is a foray for people, by listening to a podcast like this, into the world of therapy, because they're like, I don't know what happens. And they hear someone like you and they're like, oh, well, she seems really nice, and maybe I will reach out to a therapist.
Well, and you can shop around. You don't have to go to the first therapist, right?
Absolutely say that, just because you call your insurance company and they give you a name doesn't mean that that's the name that you need to stick with. Just like you would interview someone for a job. If you had a position that was open, for whatever your job was, you would interview, you would want to know if they were a fit for your organization, for your company. It's the same thing with the psychologist. You are literally employing them and bringing them into your life to help you work through some things. And any random person is not going to do. You need to have somebody, and I may be great for you, Corey, but Tracy, you may be like, oh, Dr. Streeter, really
I just want to put it
understanding
on the record. That's not the case. And I already love you and I would go to you. Thank you. No, I don't want anyone thinking that.
But I love you too. So we both go to you. But yes, you're exactly right. The fit matters, right?
The fit matters. And there's some experiences I may have that may connect with you and connect with your spirit, or I may look like your mean Aunt Lucy and you can't even imagine having to sit and look at me every week.
Yeah.
And you're like,
Right.
no, this is not going to work. But one thing I will say is one of my favorite clients, one thing she tells me and she tells other people when she refers me, she says that she saw 4 people for a first session and went with me because I was the one that she liked least, because I was the one that challenged her the most. So
Wow.
again, it doesn't mean that that's the right therapist just because they're super nice. So I
Right.
wouldn't say I'm always super nice in therapy because
Right.
again, if we're dealing with your mental health and we're dealing with, you needing to kind of shift some things around for yourself, for your children, there's sometimes that I have to tell it like it is. And I have to not use kid gloves. Like you have friends that you go drinking to do that type of stuff, but I'm going to sometimes have to it may seem like it's confrontational. And again, we always have a goal in mind. But sometimes therapy, a lot of times you might leave therapy and therapy does not feel good. Therapy is not a massage. It's not a day at the spa. It is oftentimes, as therapists, we have to reopen old wounds so that they can heal correctly. We have to re-break some bones so that we can set it so that it heals the way that it's supposed to. And again, that doesn't feel good. So yeah, there should definitely be criteria that you have before you're meeting with someone, to figure out again the fit. And if you are going to get the challenge that you need in order to make the shifts that you need to make.
See, I can't wait till we can go to the Satira Streeter Institute of Healthy Relationships. I see it. I see it in the
You
future.
see it? Well, thank you for saying that.
Well, speaking of that, what's on the horizon for you? Where can our listeners find you? What kinds of things do you offer out to them? We want to make sure that they can take full advantage of your, awesome insight.
Right. So I do have it's called a PsyPact license, which means that I believe we're up to maybe 45 states, but don't quote me. But my license is covering, lots of states. So there's lots of places that people can live and they can see me. One of my favorite things to do is to go into churches and other organizations across the country and do those 1-day retreats or those 2-day retreats, to build community around relationships and give that education. And then of course there's the regular couples therapy services that we offer as well as marathon therapy, which is a John Gottman, method, well-researched method where, you spend a weekend in therapy and you literally get like 3 months worth of progress because you're going in and you're sitting on those issues and you're really taking those deep dives. And those are things that we do as well often.
It's awesome.
Well, excellent. Well, it has been such a pleasure having you on and just, again, kind of filled with hope for, that people out there are doing a lot of good by the world and, trying to help each other be our best selves. And definitely we're so grateful to have you on. So thank you again so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Excellent. Well, folks, that's another one of our wonderful episodes. And so until we chat again, make sure that you go out there and rock those relationships. If you liked what you heard, check out our show notes for resources from today's episode. Make sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram under Rock That Relationship, and go to our website at rockthatrelationship.com for updated episodes and more great information.
Thanks for listening. Now go rock those relationships.